My name is Victoria Sterling, and I'm about to tell you the most insane story of betrayal, survival, and revenge that you'll ever hear. 6 months ago, I was a successful tech entrepreneur with a loving husband, a close relationship with my sister, and what I thought was a perfect life. Today, I'm supposedly dead, at least according to my death certificate. But I'm very much alive, and I have a story that will make your blood boil. It all started on what was supposed to be the most romantic day of my life. My husband Marcus had planned this elaborate surprise for our 5th wedding anniversary. He'd rented a private helicopter for a scenic tour over the Rocky Mountains, complete with champagne, and a sunset dinner planned at a remote luxury lodge. My younger sister Emma was going to be our photographer for the day. She'd recently gotten into professional photography and had been begging me to let her practice on some real assignments. I should have known something was wrong from the moment I saw Emma that morning. She was unusually nervous, fidgeting with her camera equipment and avoiding eye contact. But I was so excited about the romantic gesture that I brushed off her weird behavior. Marcus seemed normal enough, charming, attentive, the same man I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. The helicopter ride started perfectly. The pilot, a guy named Jake who looked like he'd been flying for decades, took us up over the most breathtaking landscape I'd ever seen. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, painted in brilliant oranges and purples by the setting sun. Marcus was holding my hand, pointing out landmarks, and Emma was snapping photos like crazy. For about 30 minutes, it was pure magic. Then Marcus suggested we should get some photos near the open door for more dramatic effect. The helicopter had those large sliding doors that could open mid-flight, which Jake said was totally safe as long as we stayed harnessed in. Emma got excited about the photo opportunities, and honestly, so did I. I'd never been the type to shy away from adventure, and the idea of having some truly spectacular anniversary photos was appealing. Jake opened the door on my side of the helicopter, and the rush of wind was incredible. I was secured with a full-body harness that was supposed to be foolproof, or so I thought. Emma positioned herself to get the perfect shot of Marcus and me with the sunset and mountains in the background. She kept directing us to move closer to the edge, to lean out a little more, to really embrace the moment. I remember thinking how professional she sounded, how confident she'd become with her photography. My little sister, who used to be afraid of heights, was now fearlessly leaning out of a helicopter to get the perfect shot. I was proud of her growth, proud of how she'd found her passion. That's when everything went to hell. Emma suddenly grabbed my arm and said, "Tori, can you lean out just a little more? I want to get the mountains reflected in your eyes." I trusted her completely, so I shifted my weight toward the opening, extending my body out as far as the harness would allow. Marcus was right behind me, his hands on my waist, supposedly to keep me steady. Then I felt Emma's hands on my harness. At first, I thought she was trying to adjust something, maybe help me get into a better position. But then I heard a clicking sound, the sound of my harness being unclipped. "Emma, what are you?" I started to say, but before I could finish the sentence, she gave me a hard shove right in the chest. Time slowed down in that horrible way it does during traumatic moments. I saw Emma's face, and instead of the horror I expected to see there, I saw something cold and calculated. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't screaming. She was watching me fall with the same detached focus she'd had while taking photographs. As I tumbled out of the helicopter, I caught a glimpse of Marcus's face. He wasn't reaching for me. He wasn't screaming my name. He was just standing there, watching, with an expression I'd never seen before, relief. The fall felt endless and instantaneous at the same time. The wind was so loud I couldn't hear my own screams, but I could feel them tearing out of my throat. The ground rushed up to meet me, and in those few seconds of free fall, my mind was racing through a million thoughts. How could Emma do this? Why wasn't Marcus trying to save me? Was this really how I was going to die? I hit the forest canopy first, which probably saved my life. The branches broke my fall just enough that when I finally crashed into the ground, I was unconscious but not dead. When I woke up, it was dark, I was in agony, and I had no idea how much time had passed. Every part of my body hurt, but somehow I was alive. I'd landed in a thick grove of pine trees near a small stream. I had a broken arm, several broken ribs, a severe concussion, and cuts all over my body, but I was breathing. The first thing I did was try to call for help, but my phone was shattered, and I was clearly miles from civilization. I managed to drag myself to the stream and drink some water. The cold mountain air was already making my injuries worse, and I knew I had to find shelter, or I'd die of exposure before anyone found me. Using every ounce of strength I had left, I crawled toward what looked like a small cave formation about 100 yards away. That cave probably saved my life. It was shallow but dry, and it blocked the wind that was already dropping the temperature into dangerous territory. I used my jacket to try to stop the bleeding from the worst cuts and settled in to wait for rescue. Surely someone would be looking for me. Surely Marcus and Emma would tell the authorities exactly where I'd fallen. But as the hours turned into a full day, then 2 days, then 3, I realized that no one was coming. No helicopters were flying search patterns. No rescue teams were combing the forest. It was like I'd simply vanished from the earth, and no one cared enough to look for me. On the 4th day, I was weak from hunger and dehydration, but my head was finally clear enough to really think about what had happened. Emma had deliberately unclipped my harness. Marcus had watched me fall without trying to help. They hadn't reported my location to rescue teams because they didn't want me to be found.
They wanted me dead. But why?
What could possibly motivate my own sister and the man I loved to murder me? The answer came to me like a punch to the gut. Money. Specifically, the $5 million in life insurance I'd taken out 2 years earlier when my tech company really started taking off. Marcus had suggested it as a smart financial move to protect our future. Emma knew about it because she'd been my witness when I signed the papers. I needed 2 witnesses who weren't beneficiaries, and she'd helped me out. Marcus was the sole beneficiary of my life insurance policy. Emma was supposed to inherit half of my remaining assets according to my will, which would be substantial given the success of my company. Together, they'd be looking at something close to $8 million once all my assets were liquidated. The realization made me so angry that I actually found the strength to stand up. They'd planned this. The romantic helicopter ride, Emma's sudden interest in photography, the dramatic shots near the open door, it had all been a setup. My own husband and sister had conspired to murder me for money. I decided right then that I wasn't going to die in that cave. I was going to survive, and I was going to make them pay. Getting out of the wilderness was the hardest thing I've ever done. I had to follow the stream for miles, eating berries and drinking water when I could find it, sleeping in whatever shelter I could find. My broken arm was agony, but I used tree branches to fashion a crude splint. After 6 days of hiking through rough terrain, I finally found a logging road that led to a small town called Cedar Falls. When I stumbled into the local diner, I must have looked like I'd been mauled by a bear. The waitress took one look at me and called an ambulance. I was taken to a small regional hospital where they confirmed what I already knew: broken arm, broken ribs, severe bruising, dehydration, and malnutrition. Miraculously, my concussion hadn't caused any permanent damage, though I'd probably have headaches for months. The doctors wanted to call my emergency contacts, but I stopped them. I told them I'd been in a hiking accident and needed time to contact my family myself. I convinced them to let me stay registered under a fake name, Victoria Stone, while I recovered. It took some creative lying about lost identification and insurance cards, but small-town hospitals are surprisingly accommodating when you pay in cash. While I was recovering, I used the hospital's computer to do some research. What I found made my blood boil all over again. Marcus had already filed a missing person report, claiming that I'd gone for a solo hike and never returned. He'd told the police that I'd been acting strangely lately, and that he was worried I might have been suicidal. Emma corroborated his story, saying I'd seemed depressed and had mentioned wanting to disappear for a while. There was no mention of a helicopter ride. No mention of Emma being with us. They'd created a completely fictional narrative where I'd simply wandered off into the mountains and disappeared. The police had conducted a brief search of some popular hiking trails, but without any specific location to focus on, they'd given up after a few days. I was officially listed as a missing person, presumed dead. Marcus had already started the process of having me declared legally dead, so he could claim the life insurance. But here's the kicker. While I was researching their lies, I also discovered something else. Marcus and Emma hadn't just been planning my murder. They'd been having an affair. I found photos on Emma's social media that she'd posted months earlier, photos that showed her and Marcus together in situations that were definitely not family gatherings. A romantic dinner at a restaurant I'd never been to. A weekend getaway to a beach resort that Marcus had told me was a business trip. Photos of them looking cozy and intimate in ways that made me sick to my stomach. My husband and my sister had been betraying me long before they decided to kill me. They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer, and they'd been sleeping together the whole time. I spent 2 weeks in that hospital, planning my revenge. I couldn't just walk back into my old life and confront them. They'd already shown they were willing to kill me once. If I reappeared, they'd probably just try again, and this time they'd make sure to finish the job. I needed a better plan. That's when I decided to let them think they'd succeeded. I would stay legally dead while I gathered evidence of their crimes. Then, when the time was right, I'd expose them in the most devastating way possible. First, I needed a new identity. Through some connections I'd made in the tech world, I was able to obtain fake documents and credentials under the name Victoria Stone. It cost me most of the cash I'd had in my emergency fund, but it was worth it to be able to operate without detection. Next, I rented a small apartment in Denver under my new identity and started surveillance on my former life. I followed Marcus and Emma, photographed their meetings, recorded their conversations when I could, and slowly built a case against them. What I discovered was even worse than I'd imagined. They weren't just having an affair, they'd been systematically stealing from my company for over a year. Marcus had been using his access to my accounts to skim money from client payments, and Emma had been helping him launder it through her fake photography business. They'd stolen nearly $200,000 from me before they decided it would be easier to just kill me and take everything. But the most infuriating part was listening to them talk about me. In recordings I made of their phone conversations, they talked about me like I was an obstacle they'd removed, like I was nothing more than an inconvenient problem they'd solved. Emma actually laughed about how easy it had been to get rid of the dead weight. Marcus joked about how he'd never have to pretend to love me again. They were planning to wait exactly 1 year before getting married, long enough for it not to seem suspicious, but not so long that people would forget about poor Victoria. They were going to have a small, tasteful ceremony and then use my life insurance money to start a new business together. They'd even picked out a house they wanted to buy with my money. For 3 months, I watched them living my life, spending my money and planning their future together. Marcus was already dating openly, not Emma, but other women, to maintain the illusion that he was a grieving widower looking for comfort. Emma was playing the role of the supportive sister-in-law, helping Marcus cope with his loss, while secretly planning their life together. The whole charade made me sick, but it also gave me the perfect opportunity for revenge. I decided that their plan had one major flaw. They were going to have a very public funeral for me, complete with a memorial service where all our friends and family would come to pay their respects. Marcus had scheduled it for exactly 4 months after my disappearance, which he claimed was enough time to accept that she's really gone. That funeral was going to be my moment. I spent weeks preparing. I hired a private investigator to help me gather more evidence of their crimes. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in insurance fraud and explained my situation. I even reached out to some journalist contacts I had from my tech work, people who would be very interested in a story about insurance fraud and attempted murder. The day of my funeral was surreal. I watched from across the street as people I'd known for years filed into the church, all of them believing they were there to mourn my death. My parents were there, crying real tears for their daughter, who they thought was gone forever. My business partners were there, genuinely grieving for a friend and colleague they'd respected. Even some of my ex-boyfriends showed up to pay their respects. And there, front and center, were Marcus and Emma, playing the roles of grieving widower and devastated sister. Marcus was wearing the black suit I'd bought him for our anniversary dinner the year before. Emma was wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace, which she'd apparently inherited after my death. They were both putting on performances worthy of Academy Awards, crying and hugging people and accepting condolences. The service was scheduled to start at 2 p.m. At 1:45, I walked through the front doors of the church. The reaction was instantaneous and spectacular. People started screaming. Someone fainted. Marcus went so pale, I thought he might have a heart attack. Emma dropped the flowers she was holding and just stared at me with her mouth hanging open. I was wearing a simple black dress and had styled my hair the same way I'd worn it on the day they tried to kill me. I'd even bought the same shade of lipstick I'd been wearing that day. I wanted them to know exactly who I was and exactly what they'd done. "Hello, everyone," I said, walking slowly down the aisle toward the front of the church. "I'm so sorry I'm late to my own funeral." The chaos that followed was incredible. People were shouting questions, crying, trying to figure out what was happening. Marcus was backing away from me like I was a ghost. Emma looked like she was going to be sick. But I wasn't done yet. "I know this is confusing," I announced to the room, "but I have something very important to tell all of you. 4 months ago, my husband Marcus and my sister Emma tried to murder me by pushing me out of a helicopter. They did this so they could collect my life insurance money and steal my assets. They've been having an affair for over a year, and they've been embezzling money from my company." The silence that followed was deafening. Then everyone started talking at once. People were demanding explanations, accusations were flying, and several people were taking out their phones to call the police. Marcus tried to run, but my private investigator was blocking the back exit. Emma tried to claim that I was having some kind of mental breakdown, but I was ready for that too. "I have evidence," I announced, holding up a folder full of documents. "Photos of your affair, records of the money you stole, and audio recordings of you planning my murder and joking about my death." That's when Marcus finally spoke up. "This is insane," he shouted. "Victoria, you're supposed to be dead. Where have you been? We've been grieving for you." "I've been recovering," I said calmly, "from the injuries I sustained when you and Emma threw me out of a helicopter. I've been building a case against you, and I've been waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth." By this point, the police had arrived. I'd actually called them myself before entering the church, explaining the situation and asking them to be on standby. They arrested both Marcus and Emma on the spot, charging them with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and embezzlement. The media coverage was incredible. The story of the woman who crashed her own funeral to expose her husband and sister's murder plot made national news. I did interviews with major networks, appeared on talk shows, and even got offers for book deals and movie rights. But the best part was watching their plan completely fall apart. The life insurance company not only refused to pay out the policy, but also pressed charges for fraud. My company's board voted to pursue criminal charges for the embezzlement. And the recordings I'd made of their conversations were ruled admissible in court, which meant the jury got to hear them laughing about my death and planning their future with my money. Marcus was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Emma got 15 years as an accomplice. Neither of them will be eligible for parole for at least 10 years. The civil suits were almost as satisfying. I sued them both for everything they had, which admittedly wasn't much, since they'd already spent most of the money they'd stolen from me. But I got my grandmother's necklace back, and I got the satisfaction of watching Emma have to sell her car and her camera equipment to pay her legal fees. The most important thing, though, was that I got my life back. My real life, not the fake existence they'd tried to steal from me. My friends and family were incredible. They supported me through the legal proceedings and helped me rebuild my business. My company not only survived the scandal but actually grew stronger, as people were impressed by my resilience and determination. I also discovered who my real friends were. Some people couldn't handle the intensity of what had happened and gradually drifted away. But others stepped up in ways that amazed me. My business partner Sarah basically ran the company single-handedly while I was recovering. My college roommate Lisa flew across the country to stay with me during the trial. Even some of my employees organized fundraisers to help with my medical bills, not knowing that I was actually financially fine. 6 months later, I'm in a better place than I've ever been. I sold my old house. I couldn't stand to live there after everything that had happened, and bought a beautiful place in the mountains with a view that reminds me every day that I survived. I started a foundation that helps other victims of domestic violence and financial abuse. And I'm writing a book about my experience, with all proceeds going to organizations that support women in crisis. I also learned some important lessons about trust and intuition. Looking back, there were signs that something was wrong with Marcus and Emma's behavior, but I'd ignored them because I wanted to believe that the people I loved would never hurt me. Now I trust my instincts more, and I'm much more careful about who I let into my inner circle. The one thing people always ask me is whether I'm angry. Am I bitter about what happened? Do I hate Marcus and Emma for what they did? Honestly, I was furious for a long time. The betrayal was almost worse than the attempted murder. These were people I'd loved and trusted completely, and they'd been plotting against me for months. They'd stolen my money, destroyed my sense of security, and tried to end my life, all for financial gain. But staying angry wasn't helping me heal. Eventually, I realized that the best revenge was simply living well. Marcus and Emma are in prison, where they'll stay for many years. They lost everything they were trying to steal from me, plus their freedom and their reputations. Meanwhile, I'm free, successful, and surrounded by people who actually care about me. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if they'd succeeded. Would they have been able to live with themselves? Would their relationship have lasted, built as it was on betrayal and murder? Would they have been happy spending blood money? I'll never know, and honestly, I don't care. They made their choices, and now they're living with the consequences. What I do know is that I'm stronger than I ever thought possible. I survived a murder attempt, lived alone in the wilderness for 6 days, built a new identity from scratch, and orchestrated one of the most spectacular reveals in recent memory. I turned what should have been the worst day of my life into the moment I took control of my destiny. If you take anything away from my story, let it be this: trust your instincts, value yourself enough to demand better, and never underestimate your own strength. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you will betray you in the worst possible ways. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. You always have the choice to fight back, to survive, and to create a better life for yourself. And if someone tries to kill you for your life insurance money, well, crashing your own funeral is a pretty effective way to make sure they don't get away with it. Marcus and Emma thought they could erase me from existence and profit from my death. Instead, they ended up making me famous, stronger, and more successful than I'd ever been before. They tried to write my ending, but I wrote my own comeback story instead. That's the thing about attempted murder: if you survive it, you get the last word. And my last word is that I'm still here, still fighting, and living my best life while they rot in prison. Justice served, life reclaimed, and funeral officially crashed. But my story doesn't end there. In fact, the months following the trial brought revelations that made the original betrayal look almost simple by comparison. 3 weeks after Marcus and Emma were sentenced, I received a call from Detective Rodriguez, the lead investigator on my case. She had news that would shake everything I thought I knew about my attempted murder. "Victoria, we need to talk," she said, her voice unusually tense. "We've been investigating your sister and husband's finances more deeply, and we've found something disturbing. Can you come to the station?" When I arrived, Detective Rodriguez had spread dozens of documents across a conference table. Bank statements, phone records, travel receipts, and photographs that I'd never seen before. "We've discovered that Marcus and Emma's plan was much more elaborate than we initially thought," she began. "They didn't just decide to kill you for insurance money. They've been planning this for over 2 years, and you weren't their first target." She showed me a photograph of a woman I didn't recognize, blonde, probably in her 30s, with a warm smile. "This is Rebecca Chen. She was Marcus's first wife, before you met him. She died in a car accident 5 years ago." My blood ran cold. He told me he'd never been married before. He lied about a lot of things. Rebecca had $1 million life insurance policy, and Marcus was the beneficiary. The accident was ruled suspicious at the time, but there wasn't enough evidence to pursue charges. Detective Rodriguez pulled out more photos: Rebecca's crashed car, the accident scene, medical examiner reports. The investigating officers noted several inconsistencies. Rebecca was an excellent driver with no history of accidents, but She supposedly lost control on a road she drove every day. Her brakes had been tampered with, but Marcus had an alibi. He was at work when the accident happened. "Emma," I whispered, understanding immediately. "We think so." Phone records show that Emma was in Rebecca City the day of the accident, though she told police she was in Denver the whole time. We're reopening Rebecca's case based on what we've learned about their partnership. The detective showed me more evidence, a pattern of financial manipulation that went back years. Marcus had a history of targeting successful women, charming them into marriage, then systematically stealing from them before arranging their deaths. Emma had been his accomplice in at least 3 other cases that they were now investigating. "There's something else," Detective Rodriguez said, pulling out a thick folder. "We found Marcus's laptop, and on it was a detailed plan for your murder. It wasn't just about the insurance money, Victoria. He had a complete strategy for taking over your business after your death." She showed me documents that made my stomach turn. Marcus had researched corporate succession laws, identified key employees he could manipulate, and even drafted fake emails that would make it look like I'd been planning to sell the company before my death. He'd intended to step in as my grieving widower and convince my business partners to let him take control of my shares. "Your company is worth significantly more than the insurance policy," she explained. "We estimate he would have netted close to $15 million if his plan had worked completely." But the worst revelation was yet to come. "Victoria, we also found evidence that suggests Marcus was planning to kill Emma after a suitable period of time. Apparently, she was becoming too demanding and knew too much. We found research on untraceable poisons and staged suicides in his browser history." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything I was hearing. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me, he was a serial killer who'd been using Emma as an accomplice, planning to eventually murder her too. Emma, who I'd hated for months, was also a victim of his manipulation, even if she'd participated in terrible crimes. "We're going to need you to testify in the other cases," Detective Rodriguez said. "Your survival and the evidence you gathered could help us get justice for Rebecca and the other victims." Over the next several months, I found myself at the center of a much larger investigation. The case that had started with my attempted murder had uncovered a pattern of crimes spanning nearly a decade. Marcus had targeted at least 5 women, successfully killing 3 of them before he met me. The media attention intensified dramatically. What had been a sensational story about a woman crashing her own funeral became a nationwide investigation into a serial killer who used marriage and insurance fraud as his method. I was contacted by victims' families, law enforcement agencies from multiple states, and journalists writing books about the case. During this period, I also learned more about Emma's role in everything. Through her lawyer, she agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. What emerged was a picture of a young woman who'd been gradually manipulated and corrupted by Marcus over several years. Emma had been struggling financially when Marcus first approached her. He'd offered her money to help with small tasks, following people, taking photos, creating fake documents. She thought she was helping with cheating spouse investigations or insurance claims. It wasn't until she was deeply involved that she learned the true nature of what they were doing. "I know this doesn't excuse what I did to you," Emma wrote in a letter she sent me through her lawyer. "But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you as my sister. Marcus convinced me that you were going to cut me out of your will, that you'd become cold and selfish because of your success. He made me believe that you didn't care about our family anymore." The letter continued. "He showed me fake emails that he claimed were from you, talking about how you thought I was a failure and a burden. He told me that you were planning to fire me from any future family events and that you'd instructed your lawyer to remove me from your will. I was desperate and scared, and I believed him because I wanted the money to help pay for Mom's medical bills. This was news to me. I hadn't known that our mother was having financial problems with her health care. Emma had been too proud to ask me for help, and Marcus had exploited that pride to turn her against me. I convinced myself that if you were gone, I could use the inheritance money to take care of Mom and build a better life," Emma's letter concluded. "I know how horrible that sounds now. I know that nothing justifies what we did. But I want you to know that pushing you out of that helicopter was the worst moment of my life. I've had nightmares about it every single night since it happened. Reading Emma's letter was one of the most emotionally complicated experiences of my entire ordeal. I was still angry at her for trying to kill me, but I also felt a strange sort of pity. She'd been manipulated by a master manipulator, someone who'd spent years perfecting his ability to turn people against each other. The additional trials took over a year to complete. Marcus was eventually convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 2 additional counts of attempted murder. He received multiple life sentences, without the possibility of parole. Emma's cooperation with investigators resulted in her sentence being reduced to 8 years, with the possibility of parole in 5. During this time, I also learned about Marcus's background and how he'd become the person he was. Investigators found that his real name wasn't Marcus Sterling. He'd been born Marcus Thompson and had changed his identity multiple times over the years. He'd grown up in foster care after his parents were killed in a car accident when he was 12. He'd been shuffled between homes where he'd experienced abuse and neglect. None of this excused his crimes, but it helped me understand how someone could become so calculating and ruthless. Marcus had learned early in life that he couldn't trust anyone to take care of him, so he developed the skills to take care of himself by any means necessary. Unfortunately, those means included murder. The psychological evaluation conducted for his sentencing revealed that Marcus was a textbook psychopath, charming and manipulative on the surface, but completely lacking in empathy or genuine emotion. The psychiatrist testified that Marcus viewed other people as objects to be used for his benefit, not as human beings deserving of love or respect. As the legal proceedings finally wound down, I found myself in a strange position. I'd become somewhat famous as the woman who'd survived a serial killer and exposed his crimes. I was getting speaking requests from law enforcement conferences, victim advocacy groups, and true crime conventions. Publishers were offering me substantial advances for book deals, and production companies wanted to option my story for movies and documentaries. But fame wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was to rebuild my life and find a way to honor the memory of the women who hadn't been as lucky as I was. I established the Rebecca Chen Foundation, named after Marcus's first victim. The foundation provides financial assistance to women trying to escape abusive relationships, funds research into psychological manipulation and coercive control, and offers support services to families of murder victims. We also work with law enforcement agencies to train officers in recognizing patterns of financial abuse and murder-for-profit schemes. Through the foundation, I met other survivors of similar crimes. Women who'd escaped abusive partners who'd tried to kill them for insurance money, families who'd lost loved ones to charming sociopaths, and investigators who specialized in these types of cases. These connections helped me process my own trauma and find meaning in what had happened to me. One of the most rewarding aspects of the foundation's work has been helping to change laws around insurance fraud and spousal murder. We've lobbied for legislation that requires more thorough background checks before large life insurance policies are issued, and we've pushed for better training for insurance investigators who handle suspicious death claims. 2 years after my helicopter fall, I testified before a congressional committee about the need for better coordination between law enforcement agencies when investigating suspicious deaths involving life insurance. My testimony helped pass legislation that created a national database for tracking unusual patterns in insurance claims. I also worked with tech companies to develop software that can identify red flags in insurance applications and claims. Using my background in technology, I helped design algorithms that can spot suspicious patterns that human investigators might miss. But perhaps the most important work I've done has been speaking directly to women about recognizing the warning signs of financial abuse and manipulation. I've given talks at colleges, women's shelters, and corporate events, sharing my story and teaching people how to protect themselves from predators like Marcus. The questions I get most often are, how did you not see the signs? And what would you tell women to watch out for? The answer to the first question is complicated. Marcus was exceptionally skilled at manipulation. He'd had years of practice perfecting his techniques, and he'd learned exactly how to present himself as the perfect partner. He was attentive without being clingy, successful without being arrogant, and supportive without being controlling. He seemed to genuinely care about my dreams and goals, and he encouraged my success rather than feeling threatened by it. The warning signs that I missed were subtle. He was always eager to know about my financial situation, but he framed it as wanting to plan our future together. He suggested a life insurance policy, but he presented it as responsible financial planning. He gradually isolated me from some of my friends, but he did it so skillfully that I thought I was making those choices myself. He also had an uncanny ability to identify and exploit people's insecurities. With me, he picked up on my fear of not being lovable because of my success. Many men had been intimidated by my career achievements, and Marcus made me feel like he was different. With Emma, he exploited her financial insecurity and her fear that I thought less of her because she wasn't as successful as I was. As for what women should watch out for, I always share a list of red flags that I wish I'd recognized. Partners who push for large life insurance policies early in the relationship, especially if they suggest themselves as the primary beneficiary. Financial secrecy or pressure to combine finances quickly. Attempts to isolate you from friends and family, even if they're subtle. Excessive interest in your business or career, particularly if they start suggesting changes to your will or business structure. And perhaps most importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate it rather than dismissing your concerns. 3 years after the helicopter incident, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Rebecca Chen's sister, Linda, who had attended Marcus's trial for her sister's murder. "Dear Victoria," Linda wrote, "I wanted to thank you for giving my family the closure we never thought we'd have. For 5 years, we knew that Rebecca's death wasn't an accident, but we couldn't prove it. Your courage in exposing Marcus and your willingness to testify in Rebecca's case finally gave us the justice we'd been seeking." Linda went on to tell me about Rebecca, how she'd been a brilliant engineer who'd started her own consulting firm, how she'd been excited about her future with Marcus, and how devastated the family had been when she died. Reading about Rebecca's life and dreams made Marcus's crimes feel even more real and tragic. "Rebecca would have loved your foundation," Linda concluded. "She always wanted to help other women succeed in business and life. Knowing that her memory is being honored through your work helping other women gives our family a sense of peace." Receiving that letter was an emotional turning point for me. It reminded me that my survival hadn't just been about my own second chance at life. It had also been about getting justice for women who hadn't survived and preventing other women from becoming victims. As I write this, 5 years have passed since Marcus pushed me out of that helicopter. He's serving multiple life sentences in a maximum security prison, where he'll remain until he dies. Emma was released on parole after serving 4 years and has been working with the foundation as part of her community service. Our relationship is complicated. We're not close the way sisters should be, but we've found a way to work together towards something positive. My life now is nothing like what I imagined it would be 5 years ago, but in many ways, it's better. I'm more careful about trust, but I'm also more appreciative of genuine relationships. I'm more aware of my own strength and resilience. And I've found a sense of purpose that I never had when my biggest concerns were quarterly profits and market share. The foundation has helped over 2,000 women escape dangerous relationships, and we've contributed to legislative changes that have made it harder for predators to commit these types of crimes. We've funded research that has led to better psychological profiles of financial predators, and we've helped train hundreds of law enforcement officers in recognizing and investigating these cases. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still flinch when I hear helicopters overhead. And I still struggle with trusting people completely. But I've also learned that survival isn't just about making it through the initial trauma. It's about building a life that honors both your own strength and the memory of those who weren't as fortunate. Marcus thought he could erase me from existence for profit. Instead, his attempt on my life led to the exposure of multiple murders, the prevention of future crimes, and the creation of a support network that will help protect women for generations to come. Sometimes the best revenge, really, is living well and using your survival to make the world a little bit safer for everyone else.
The end.